I'm Danielle Kessner. This is Paved with Good Intentions. Is any of this getting through to you? The only thing we have to fear is fear itself, and also bears. Welcome to another episode of Paved with Good Intentions, the show that asks the difficult questions you didn't even think you cared about. I'm Danielle Kessner, the Fleet-Footed, and this podcast is produced sponsor-free, so thank you for supporting independent artists. Today we'll be discussing the topic of hype. But first, here's a piece of random trivia, or in this case, multiple pieces of random trivia. Did you know today, September 17th, the day when I'm recording this podcast, this is the day that the U.S. Constitution was signed in 1787. It was also the date of the single bloodiest day in American history, which was the Battle of Antietam during the Civil War in 1862. It's also the day that Francis Scott Key finished the poem that would eventually become the lyrics to the Star-Spangled Banner, and this happened in 1814. So with all these awesome things happening in American history, why isn't today American History Day? They should probably change that, because otherwise I'm going to continue celebrating today simply as Roddy McDowell's birthday. And now on to our episode, Hype. Believe it or leave it. So, in today's age of social media and viral marketing and Twitter and Facebook and all that fun stuff, there's one thing that is almost universally true, is that things get hyped up a lot. And when I talk about, what the hype is, I mean, there's different things. Sometimes it's the hype about something that's coming up. Sometimes it's the hype about something that's been released that people are like really into. Sometimes it's the hype about something that is going on that's bad. And there's plenty of examples of each of these things going on right now in the world. But I kind of wanted to talk about hype just in general, or specifically about the anticipatory hype, but I'm going to get to kind of hype in general. So, sorry, I'm adjusting my camera. You're going to have to deal with that. Okay. It basically came from a conversation I was having with my roommate the other day about Fallout 4. With Fallout 4 coming out, which is like one of the biggest video game releases this year, there's a lot of hype around it. And even when I go onto Yahoo, I always see, or Facebook, I always see, articles about Fallout. They say something about, how much gameplay there is or whatever. I'll get into it. But there's a lot of stuff out there about this game, and it's all just meant to build this momentum, build this hype to make you want to run out on day one, grab that game, and pretty much test the limits of your employment when it comes to how much time they're willing to let you miss while you play this video game. But before we get into the specifics, I want to talk kind of about hype in general, because it is a huge part of the culture we live in now. In the United States, hype means so much, because there's always something that people get hyped about, or something that gets people's blood boiling, whether it's excitement, whether it's anger, whether it's sadness. It's just kind of how we react to things now. Is, take a good example. What happened, the other day. I'm not going to get into this right now, but the boy who brought a clock to school and they mistook it for a bomb, which, rather than putting my opinion on it, is one of those things that, it was everywhere immediately. And now, even now, it's still something that's just coming. There's constant stories about it. With the Kim Davis thing, the clerk in Kentucky, that's another thing I've talked about on this podcast before. It's that hype. It's, people taking something and just like, there's nothing else in the world except that story. But there's two kinds of hype. There's anticipatory hype, and then there's reactive hype. Anticipatory is basically there's something in the future that's going to happen, some movie that's going to come out, or video game, or something that you're building yourself up to, even on like a personal level. Wedding day. My friend's getting married next week, so obviously that's something that you could say the hype is kind of building for that, but definitely on a smaller scale. And then there's reactive hype, which is that you have something that's exploded in popularity, or that everybody wants to, they want to take part in this massive thing that's happening. And that's kind of this reactive hype. It's like, wow, this came out and it becomes a pop culture phenomenon, and then it, leads to all sorts of other things. And that's reactive hype. And I'm going to talk about that just a little bit here, because reactive hype in itself is kind of odd because of just how things will come out, and when they first come out, there's like maybe a little bit of a whimper about it. It's like, oh, this is cool, you should go see this. But then that word of mouth starts to spread, and suddenly everybody's like, holy crap, you really got to see this. And one of the best examples of this in recent memory is Frozen, the Disney movie that came out. I know I talk about Disney a lot on this podcast, but just you're going to have to deal with it. But when Frozen came out, I remember seeing it opening weekend. I was like, man, this is a really good movie. I mean, it wasn't like the best movie I'd seen. It was like, it was good though. But I was telling people, you got to see this movie. It's just a really cute and fun movie. You really should see it. Well, I was one of millions of people who said that. And so when, I told two friends and then they told two friends, and next thing you know, everybody on planet Earth is singing Let It Go. But that's how that's how you react when, or the reactive hype works is, it starts maybe like kind of small that, people are excited about it, but then word of mouth gets out that it's really good, it's really entertaining, there's something about it that just hooks people, and then it's everywhere. And the reason why I bring up Frozen specifically, because it's not unique that it's happened, that what happened with Frozen, but just the extent of it was crazy, and you still see so much Frozen like merchandise and gear and stuff like that. This is a 2-year-old movie, and there's still tons of Frozen stuff just like out there and like dominating the landscape of, children's merchandising. And then of course, when something like that happens, you get copycats. You get people who are like, okay, Frozen was a really good idea, so now let's try and, capture that fire for ourselves and do something very similar to it and do that. We really haven't seen much in that way, but we know other people are like, okay, how do we capitalize on that same kind of success that something like Frozen had? And that's reactive hype. That's taking something that people are, really excited about and then expanding it or trying to capture that they're on their own. A really good example of that is with the DC Universe movies trying to do what Marvel did. Marvel, I knew from the start when I saw Iron Man, and obviously, they weren't being subtle about it, but I knew that it was going to become this massive monster that the Avengers has become because of just how they set it up, and because they did it in such a subtle, or like how they set it up was in a subtle way. They obviously weren't hiding that that's what they were trying to do, but they set it up in kind of a subtle way, and then it just exploded into what it is today, where the Avengers is now, you have a Avengers movie slated, every 6 months for the next 10 years or something. But I look at the DC universe, which, the Dark Knight trilogy was fantastic, but it's also, they cut it, they contained it. The Dark Knight trilogy is done. But they saw what Marvel is doing, and they're saying, okay, let's try to do that on our own with the Justice League, which people have been trying to get out there for years. And so they started with Man of Steel, and even in Man of Steel, there were some Easter eggs here to say that that's what they're trying to do. The problem is that they're doing it less organically and more kind of reactive, or trying to do it in their own style. And we don't know how it's going to work yet because we only have one movie at this point. And with Batman v Superman coming out next year, it's kind of hard to tell. But that's what happens when there's a hype around something that happened. That's the reactive hype. But what I'm more interested in is anticipatory hype, because that's what I really want to focus on, and that's what is, to me, one of the more important topics when you're looking at pop culture, because you see something that's coming out and suddenly you're just so excited. It's like they tease you with this, they give you a little present, they tease you with it, and then you want to just take that, and you actually have that, and you kind of ruminate on it, and you take that until they give you something else, and you just continue to nibble on it until you get that opportunity. It's almost like feeding an addiction. And I am as guilty of that as anybody, because when, the Lord of the Rings movies were coming out, even though the first Lord of the Rings movie had, didn't have a huge amount of hype, it did in my circles, but not like worldwide. And then when it came out and became the phenomenon it was, then people like jumped onto the bandwagon. But there's some things like Fallout 4, which is coming out, and I already kind of mentioned this, that when they announced Fallout 4 was like one of the greatest moments you could have asked for at that time, because it was like they finally have given us something that, Fallout 3 came out in what, 2008, 2007 or 2008. So we've been waiting a long time for a follow-up to Fallout 3, which was, it still stands as one of my absolute favorite video games. I'm into that, third-person shooter RPG type game, so it really, like, getting Fallout 4 was always just this, like, ugh. But what they did was they really kept it under wraps. Like, there were always kind of whispers about Fallout 4, but there were also so many stories that were like, well, it isn't actually going to happen. It's, we're not actively working on it. And then out of the blue, they announce it, Fallout 4, it's coming out in 8 months. That I'll take. But even 8 months in today's culture and how we digest information and how we process and do all that stuff, even 8 months is almost too much time to give for what's happening. Apple almost has it down where, there's a lot of hype built up to when they release their new products, when they release a new phone, when they release, a new iOS or something like that. And people get like really hyped up about, okay, is it going to be like this? Is this? There's leaks, there's all this other stuff. But once they actually release it, once they actually give you, they might give you the tidbits up front, but once they give you the full on, this is what we're selling, this is what we're giving you, then they release it like a month later. So it's not like this huge wait, which, kind of helps with hype. When the longer the distance between when you first give those little nibbles of what you're offering and the actual release of that information, or that, that game, that movie, that whatever, the longer the period of time in there, the more opportunity there is for that hype to just become unrealistic. And, the conversation I had with my roommate was this exact thing about Fallout 4, is that, well, obviously Fallout 4 is something that I can't wait to play. It's something that, is going to be so exciting. And so obviously when they release little stories, little tidbits about it, I'm curious. I want to hear, I want to read things. I want to know kind of what I'm getting into, whereas she wants to kind of ignore it all right now and just say, you know what, if I take too much of that information, I'm going to build up the hype way too much on my own, and then when it comes out, there's no way it could meet my expectations. And that's the danger with hype, is you're creating unrealistic expectations. When Skyrim came out back in 2011, that was one of those things that I had, because I played Oblivion to death. I played that game way too much. So when Skyrim came out, it was almost like I wanted it to be Oblivion, just in a new setting, with new characters, with new dialogue, with new missions, stuff like that. But it wasn't. They changed things, and so at first I was really kind of let down. I was like, "Oh, this isn't what I expected." But that's because I went into it with such a huge expectation. But then once I actually started playing it and finding out that actually it might be one of the best games ever made, then I let it go. And I'm hoping to do the same thing with Fallout 4. I haven't been like as crazy obsessed with every little piece of information that Bethesda is releasing, but that doesn't mean I don't go and pull pieces of information. Where I am being really careful, and this one is really hard for me to do, is with Star Wars Episode 7, which comes out in December. And they're constantly releasing these like pessimistic stories about, what the movie could be like, or what, they talk about the lightsaber stuff, or they talk about the fact that it's being released in December and it's not going to make $1 billion or something, which I don't really care. I don't care about money and how much a movie makes. I saw Jurassic World. Entertaining, but just because it made $1 billion doesn't mean it's that great of a movie. But I want Episode 7 to be so good because I've always been such a diehard Star Wars fan, and when Episodes 1, 2, and 3 came out, I was young enough that Episode 1 didn't bother me when it came out. Even Episode 2, I remember I thought, this is like the greatest movie ever. But then I go back and actually watch it with, a little bit more experienced eyes, or a little bit more age and wisdom, and realize that Episode 2 is actually worse than Episode 1. But, beside the point, I really want Episode 7 to be that magical experience that I've been just dying to get again. And with the amount of information that they release about Star Wars, they release on the actual movie, they don't release a ton. They release a little bit here and there. So sometimes I read it, sometimes I don't. But they've also been releasing some more trailers, some more little sneak peeks. I'm not watching those. I've seen the trailer probably about a dozen times. The one with, Chewie, we're home kind of thing, and it just it melts me every time. And every time I watch it, I think, is this the time where I'm going to start to think, this can't live up to my expectations? So I have to pull myself back out of that. Because the biggest danger of any of these hype is the hype exhaustion of you've been that's like they talked about with Batman v Superman of releasing any video or footage or anything like that too early, is the fact that, well, if you have to wait 2 years before this movie comes out, it's going to become exhausting just getting to the hype. It's oh God, now it's another 8 months before this movie comes out. That was kind of the way it was with Avatar. The best example of this, though, for me personally, would have been the video game Destiny. When Destiny came out, it didn't live up to the hype. It was an entertaining game. It was fun, and I played the hell out of it for about 3 months straight. But then I got to a point where I just couldn't take it anymore. I couldn't take what it was giving me. And even when I was playing it to start with, it wasn't this rose... I mean, I had a little bit of rose-colored glasses, but I was also thinking, this isn't what I wanted it to be. And part of that's because, I wanted it to be another Halo with maybe some added, social benefits to it, some social aspects to it. I wanted it to be like that, and it wasn't, because there was no story. The social stuff was kind of repetitive, and then the game itself was just grind, and you get nothing out of it. So when it was originally released, it didn't live up to the hype. And that was a game that I was excited about and reading about and watching videos for probably a good 2 years before it actually came out. And when it finally did and was, well below the expectation, it's what was all that energy spent for? And that's the danger with hype, is that you're exuding all this energy for something that might not even be real. You're trying to impose your own expectations on something over which you have no control. The things that I like to really get myself hyped up about now are things where I don't have a lot of information. I don't know, Interstellar, when that movie came out, it didn't quite exceed my expectations as a movie, but at least when I went into it, I didn't know everything about it. I knew enough about it to be excited, and I knew it was Christopher Nolan, and that was the kind of thing that just really got me excited about it. But there wasn't a lot of hype for me building up to it. It wasn't oh my God, I need to get tickets 2 weeks in advance to go see this movie. It was more I'm very excited to see it. I can't wait to see it, but I didn't buy into the hype so much. And that's kind of with anticipatory hype, that's what you got to do, is you have to know your limits so that you don't get so overly hyped. And that it goes for anything, whether it's video games, movies, music, which is a little bit more selective, per person. But then there's also our own personal lives. When we hype ourselves up to say, this event that I'm doing is going to be so exciting, and then you get there and it might not be as exciting as you thought, or it might be it just doesn't live up to that expectation. We have to be careful where we put our expectations, because it's almost worse to go in with high expectations and be let down than it is to go in with low expectations and at least be, moderately entertained. If it's I'm not all that interested in it, and you go in, it's I got something out of it. It wasn't great, but I got something out of it. That's better than going into it being this is going to be the greatest thing ever, and then walking out going, I just wasted 2 years of my life expecting this piece of crap. So, that's my 2 cents about hype. Thanks a lot for watching, and check out more Paved with Good Intentions right here on YouTube, or you can tune in on iTunes and Stitcher. You can also check out my other videos and anything I've ever favorited, the good stuff anyway. And be sure to check out my other podcast, Translation, which is found at the link below, as well as on iTunes and Stitcher. You can also visit me on Twitter at Danny Kessner, or you can find me on Facebook. And if you have any questions you'd like me to ponder on the show, send me an email at translationpodcast@gmail.com. I do want to hear from you, so don't make me find you. And once again, this podcast is produced sponsor-free, so thank you for supporting independent artists. We'll see you on the other side.